if you're using the cloud, and that means any cloud, any SaaS or infrastructure as a service, that could be Office 365, G Suite, email, could be Outlook's email, Gmail, or any communication messaging system like Slack or Skype. OneDrive, Box, Dropbox, Amazon Azure. When we say using the cloud, these are the names that people typically think of. But there are many names that may not be here. But if you're using the cloud, this webinar is important to you. If you read the headlines, we can see that there are new security threats almost every day. And we're going to talk about those security threats, but we're going to focus today on probably the most important of those security threats, and that is phishing. So while Checkpoint Avanan offers security for all SaaS, we're going to spend a little extra time talking about the latest Gmail phishing scam or Office 365 phishing scam and how to defend against those things. The threat is very, very real, and it's one that the entire industry is attempting to stop, but only Checkpoint and Avanan are focused on stopping these threats in SaaS. Today, Checkpoint Security is #1 for security in the network. They have industry leading tools for malware sandboxing called Sandblast, industry leading antivirus, data leak prevention, file sanitization, and file encryption. So you may already be using Checkpoint in your network because of their long time in the industry and their reputation for detecting the next terrible threat. What Avanan brings to the table is that we have taken those Checkpoint tools and made them available to the cloud. You can now deploy Checkpoint Security in any SaaS. So whether you're using Google or Office or Amazon or Box or Slack, you can now have Sandblast from Checkpoint, Antivirus from Checkpoint, data leak prevention tools from Checkpoint, file sanitization, file encryption from Checkpoint deployed in the cloud for the cloud. Very simply, any cloud or any Checkpoint security, you can deploy it in one click. What I'd like to do now is give over the control to Dan, who will talk about Checkpoint and why it is the industry-leading security for malware.
Oh, thank you, Michael. So I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that it's accepted to this point, email is the leading entry point for malware into your network. It's the weapon of choice for hackers. So we look at some of the numbers. 30% of all phishing messages were opened by that target. What's that mean? That means 1/3 of all your users are actually opening these. And about 12% of those are actually successful in delivering some sort of malicious attachment or link to those users. And where this becomes concerning, 3% of those are actually alerted to management. So we look at today, 72% of organizations will implement some sort of cloud-based Office suite, whether it's Gmail, 365, other sorts of solutions that are out there. And it is a growing adoption rate where it's highlighting security as being a serious concern. So I'm assuming by anyone being on this call, you have some concerns around SaaS applications. More often than not, it's going to be email is the biggest concern there, which is something to be shared amongst many people in this industry. So how big is this threat really? 99% of malware hashes are only seen for 58 seconds. So what does that mean? That means that malware is only seen once. So each instance of malware being created is being unique into its delivery. So what we're seeing is a very common trend as malware is being distributed via various campaigns, whether it's email links, URLs. They're all unique individual pieces of malware. So if we look at some of the traditional networking security technologies out there, you use AVs, this is probably the most common we see. The predominant way that malware is detected, prevented, and actually investigated is based on hashes of those files. So hackers, being the creative, individuals that they are, they say, hey, if all they're using is some tool to detect the hash of a known piece of malware, well, we can simply change that hash in a matter of seconds. So rather than sending out the same piece of malware to thousands and thousands of users, instead, we'll, on a case-by-case basis, I'll create 1 million individual unique hashed files and distribute them across that network. And this is an example of how quickly hackers are modifying the code to avoid detection. We look at a lot of the solutions and technologies that exist today, where they are in a position what I refer to as a detect to prevent. And what that means is once a file is detected, a signature or a hash becomes created for that file. And it can take anywhere from 8 to 30 minutes for that to go in from a detect to prevent mode. So we look at this scenario where if these files only exist for 58 seconds, as every file comes in, by the time whatever sort of system or security you have in place detects this file, puts it into prevent, by the time it's already prevent, that file has been changed, modified, and moved on. What does that mean to you? That means all these unique files, as they're being delivered to your network, will never actually be prevented. It's great that it's detected, but by the time it's detected, there's some sort of report, there's some sort of reaction. We're beyond the point of anything. It's too late. The users have probably already clicked on that email. They've probably already opened that attachment, and the machine's already been infected. So now this challenge becomes even greater as we move to cloud environments. So how can we bring this same hardened infrastructure that you're building on your networks today? I'm assuming anyone running email, running Exchange, they have really secure networks. They have endpoint security, network security, perimeter security, and that's great. But in this world, as we're moving to SaaS and cloud applications, we realize that our perimeter existing, our infrastructure that we spend years and years developing and hardening and developing these strong security posture, it's all gone. The second we push things out to the cloud, users are in the cloud, the connected things in the cloud, they're no longer on your network. Most of them, the mobile workforce is, no one's traditionally working in an office today. They're at coffee shops, they're traveling, they're in airports. It's great if everyone is inside of the network, they're behind security, but the reality is that that's not what's happening. So how are we going to take that same security and extend that out into the cloud? So that's what Checkpoint introduces our family of solutions. So we look at the traditional Sandblast product suite, where we can, we have on-premise application appliances for doing the emulation. We have security gateways, IPS, AV, all these products. We extend that out to the endpoints, full endpoint suites on the endpoints themselves, protecting them with app control, AV, malware detection. And now introducing, when Sandblast Cloud integration with Avanan is, we now have the ability to take the same protections, the same security that exists in your network today, extend them out to the cloud. And where this becomes really important is not only are we taking the same technologies, the same solutions, it can also be the same policies. So the same ways we're protecting our perimeter, we're now taking the same enforcement, the same configuration, the same monitoring, the same logging, and the same integration from a whole single glass perspective and extend those out into those applications. There are products within Checkpoint ourselves that we're building, but where we find the challenge is today we offer 365. More often than not, if one customer is using a cloud application, it's probably not limited to 365. So this is where our partnership with Avanan comes in. Avanan brings to us the ability for any SaaS application that exists. We can extend our solutions to those applications using the Avanan platform. So with this, we get a full set of protections, AV for files, URL reputation. By URL reputation, I mean the ability to actually see URLs in attachments or in emails and actually to follow those links. I may send a phishing attack to a user with no attachment, but has a link in that. We actually can see that link. If there are any files that this link points to, actually take those files, emulate those files, do we determine to see whether, beyond just an attachment is being malicious. Again, emulation, link files, and then threat extraction, emulation of attachments. So as I talked here, URL reputation, the ability to allow, block, limit websites based on reputation of the URLs themselves. Traditional AV to block a download of known malware. Again, we're talking about, in this case, of known malware, going back to the point of this is a file that's been, a signature's been created, a hash of fingerprints exists. And then for files that we don't know, the ability to do threat extraction, which I'll talk a little more on, and this is the being able to deliver safe versions of content, whether it's malicious or non-malicious, prior to the ability to determine it's SaaS or not. And again, the traditional Sandblast emulation. So how can we reduce the attack? So more often than not, you've probably heard plenty of sales pitches by many vendors where they'll talk about, we have the highest detection rate, we're better than everyone, time to block, and things like that. I'm going to try to avoid to, push you and say, hey, Checkpoint's the best. I'll let you make that determination yourself. And I'll even encourage you, please test the competition. There's a lot of vendors out there in this space. Going back a few years ago, FireEye was probably the only notable. Today, I think there's probably over a dozen you'll see on a Gartner NSS report. Test these for yourself. That being said, no one's perfect, Checkpoint included. No one is going to detect 100% of all malware and block that. So how do you handle that? And this is the general approach is going to be a multi-layered, multi-tiered approach. The majority of files, we'll call them half or so, AV can detect. A signature has been created, someone else has seen that. If any file has been detected or seen at any Checkpoint gateway through the entire world, a fingerprint, a hash, a signature has been created. 30 minutes later, that signature has been pushed to every other gateway in the world. So as long as you're not patient zero, you're being protected. So that's great with AV. It's simple, it's quick, it's efficient. So what happens if you are patient zero? This file's truly never been seen before. It's a brand new hash, a brand new signature, or a brand new variant. This is where, the traditional sandboxing comes in. And again, when I say sandboxing, it's commodity. Everyone's good enough. Anywhere between 85, 80 to 90%, 95% detection rates, which is great. But what happens about what it doesn't detect? How do you handle the files that you don't know about, the unknown unknowns? And that's where the threat extraction comes in. So in this small, security gap, small for some, bigger for others, this is the technology referred to as threat extraction within Checkpoint. This being a differentiator between us and our competition, where in this scenario and when we know we're not going to detect files, because again, no one's perfect, there's always something to be missed, threat extraction will have that coverage to prevent these unknowns from getting in. So what does this look like? What it will do is allow you to provide instant protection and safe delivery of content, whether malicious or non-malicious. So we look at an email. In this example, what we're seeing is email comes in. This may have been a doc or PDF. Rather than delivering it immediately to the potentially malicious, because we have been able to determine it, we can take this file and convert it to a PDF by stripping out all active content, or in the case of a document file, remove JavaScripts, Flash content, any sort of executable content within a document, or simply take this file and pass it through a PDF print spool. So the best example I always to give is in HR. How many people in HR receive files in a day? If they're doing the job, probably, hopefully a lot, because they're receiving lots of unsolicited resumes via, various hiring websites. So if I'm a bad guy, I say, hey, I need to attack this company. I need to find the contact for someone in HR. Well, how could that be? I go to LinkedIn, search it up, and say, oh, head of HR. Perfect. Send an email and say, here's my resume. It may be a real resume, maybe not. I attach a bunch of malware to it. It's a brand new 0-day, whatever it may be. I say, hey, no one's ever seen this. No one can detect this because it's brand new. Attach, send. What's the HR person going to do immediately? Say, great, this is a phenomenal resume. I need to forward this immediately to CEO. I need this guy hired today. So takes email, forwards along. What happened in the background was not only did they configure HR forward along to various people, recruiters, finance, whomever. Now they've actually done the legwork for the bad guys to deliver the malware for themselves. An hour goes by. The CISO gets an alert. Hey, we've detected malware. Sorry, it's too late. It's already been through, but we detected it. Great. Well, in the meantime, whatever this payload was, it's too late. It's spread laterally. It's all over the network. And now you're calling instant response saying, hey, can someone come help me out with this? Excuse me. So what's the alternative? Instead, using something in the case of the technology of threat extraction is, rather than delivering this file that may or not have been malicious, instead, hey, let's convert all PDF and document files that come through the gateway to our HR department, pass them through a print spooler. Again, as far as I know, there's no malware that exists that can go through a print spool and still continue on today. Again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So what we're doing is we're taking that file and essentially making a photocopy of that, passing it along to the end user, say, hey, this file may have been malicious or not. We don't know. But here's a copy of it. Feel free to view it, do whatever you want with it. But it then gives that user that option. If you still need the original file in the future, and let me step through. It'll give that user the option to access the original file, but only if the file has already been scanned and determined to be malicious. So not only is it allow users deliver of content immediately, but also prevents files to be determined and gives them additional time to determine the malicious content or nature of these files. So, and again, what it's doing is converting these files and removing the active content in a matter of seconds. So rather than waiting for a file to be scanned or analyzed, which can sometimes take 8, 10, 15, 20 minutes, delivering this content to the user immediately and providing the option of getting the original file later. In a lot of cases, on a case-by-case basis of whomever you define your policy, in the case of HR, 99% of the time, the original PDF they don't need, a copy of that PDF is good enough, and they move on. So for anyone who's an existing Checkpoint customer today, these technologies should look very familiar to you. The same tools, the same logging, the same reporting you're going to get in the traditional sandbox environment is also available through the Avanan portal. So if anyone who has Checkpoint today, it's a very familiar and product to use because the same reporting, the same information you're receiving today in your traditional networking security also becomes available through the Avanan portal. So if you are a Checkpoint customer, great, because you'll be familiar with it. But if you're not a Checkpoint customer, that's great too, because whether these tools are new or different to you, it doesn't matter. These can exist independently. They can integrate to your existing smart event, and work like normal. So, all right, and Michael, I'll give it back to you at this point.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, Dan. So, again, because Avanan takes these Checkpoint tools, puts them into the cloud, cloud-based version of these tools, and then connects them via API to your cloud service, we can use malware sandboxing for any file share, use it for email, same with data leakage prevention, files that might be inadvertently shared, email that might be inadvertently sharing confidential information. But again, let's focus now on phishing, the #1 concern. And again, closing that phishing gap. So what's nice about the Avanan platform is that we can take that full suite of checkpoint tools and then also offer some of our own. And so Avanan has developed something called SmartPhish, which is an additional layer of phishing protection that's not available anywhere else, that focuses specifically on those behavioral threats, like whale phishing, spear phishing, title spoofing, so that we are actually analyzing the emails themselves. Now, what's nice is that because we are monitoring all inbound and outbound email coming from a particular customer, we can learn about those users, who those users are, and what those names represent. So if we see someone else, another email address purporting to be CEO, or another person with the same name but with an outside email address, we can identify those as potential spear phishing threats. So combining that macro information from customers all over to the micro information about that specific customer. This allows us to address insider threats. And that is when the threat coming from your network or from your users, and many times that is just because of compromised accounts. Someone has logged in as one of your users and now is starting to either spread phishing emails or even malicious files internally within your organization. Now, having that micro ability to look at individual user and individual user behavior, we can see that anomalous behavior and prevent it. In fact, recently, the latest Google threat was the OAuth API authentication threat. And instead of trying to steal username and password, it was actually asking the user to authenticate a piece of software, an API-based SaaS solution that connected invisibly and silently to Google. And the same threat is there for Office 365 or any other SaaS. But the problem with the API-based threat is that it's invisible, takes one time, and even changing password doesn't make a difference. What's nice about the Avanan platform, because we monitor via API, not only do we prevent that threat at the moment, but we can also continuously monitor API connections from third-party SaaS to look for and prevent this kind of threat. In fact, just recently there was a Google Drive, OneDrive phishing threat that used the user's comfort with authenticating and re-authenticating to their Office suites to gain access and download malicious files. Now, because we're talking about phishing threats or email threats, many times people ask how we compare to pretty much what is the industry standard for email protection, and that's an MTA, mail transfer agent. The idea is that all of your email, inbound email, gets instead redirected, not going to your email server or not going to Office 365 first, going through an email gateway. And that email gateway may be doing a lot of the same things, the sandboxing and phishing analysis, but because it's a proxy gateway, it has a couple of limitations. One, that proxy gateway only monitors inbound email. Now, some can be configured for an extra cost to monitor outbound email, and that's wonderful, and you should, but no MTA monitors internal email, user-to-user email, that insider threat. What's nice about Avanan's connectivity is that we are not a proxy. We are not a gateway. Users don't redirect traffic. Email does not get redirected through us. We connect via API, which means that we are there with not only full visibility, but also full control of every single email, every single inbox, and most importantly, internal email. So for that insider threat, if someone has a compromised account, and starts sending email to other users, while that would normally be missed by a standard NPA-based system, we would be able to identify that threat, scan that email before it moves to another inbox. And in fact, a key thing, especially with new advanced email threats, let's use the example of a URL-based threat. We might scan and identify an email, test that URL, and find that it is not malicious. But 5–10 minutes later, we may get new information from the millions and millions of sources of information out there that URL has now turned malicious. Now with an MTA, that email has already gone by. It has no control. But because we connect via API, we can actually go back into that inbox, identify that now malicious URL, and quarantine it. We can also see if that user had actually opened it, and if there is a threat there. In fact, not only can we go back in time 10 minutes or an hour, we can go back in time months and look for those hidden threats, for emails that might be in the inbox or emails that might be in the outbox that show you a potentially compromised user, or go into your file share, go into your Slack and your other communication tools, and to identify threats not only in real time, but also historical. And this is extremely important when we find new threats, many times long after the fact, new vectors, new technologies that are released via WikiLeaks, for example, but have been out in the wild for a lot longer than we'd like it to. We can go back in time and identify those threats. So the answer is yes. Can you use the same Sandblast that you would use in the network for Gmail, Office 365? Yes. For OneDrive, SharePoint, Google Drive, any file sharing. And we talked about security today for phishing. We talked about security for file sharing, but this also applies for data leakage. So if you have confidential information that's being shared in the cloud, and you may want to share it in the cloud, or you may want to control that information in the cloud, yes, Avanan can deploy Checkpoint DLP in your cloud storage, not only preventing confidential information from leaving that cloud storage, but also limiting access to that confidential information between users, your own users, or between departments, setting up virtual firewalls within cloud storage or within Slack or other communication devices, so that now all of your SaaS is being monitored not only for malware, but also for confidential information. So, and I think the most important question is, can you use Checkpoint to stop phishing in Office 365 or Gmail? And now with Avanan, you can say yes. So those are kind of the leading questions we hope to answer on this webinar.